Hey up and welcome to another episode of Last Cast. Today you join us once again up at Sunrise Lakes on the Match Lake again today. And what we're going to do is revisit an episode or a method that we've actually covered in the past, and it turns out to be one of our most popular ones, and that's paste fishing. As I say, it's one of the most popular videos, but we weren't particularly happy with how we'd presented it and we think we could do a lot better. So the idea behind today's session is going to be looking in depth about paste fishing in sort of every aspect of that style of fishing, in terms of using it on both running line and on the pole as well. So as I say, it's going to be quite a long video today, but really comprehensive. So I'll quickly mention like I say what we're going to do today. We're going to cover it on the straight lead. As you can see, we've got a nice open water peg behind us, and we'll sort of explain more about that as the session progresses. And we're also going to cover it on the pole as well, fishing the long pole, and then later on we might cover fishing it down the edge or short. We'll just see how the session goes. In terms of the actual format of today, we're going to fish for about 5 hours. Again, just sort of show you how we'd go fishing the paste for a full sort of match scenario type session really, and how the peg will progress through that. So like I say, that's all that sort of format of the episode looked at. We'll now look at the rigs and show you what we're going to use today to catch these fish. As I said, we're going to cover both pole fishing and running line, so quickly have a look at the running line setup first. And we've just got a simple bomb rod setup here. If you can grab hold of the rig, usual kind of thing. You can see we've got a 3012 size Daywood TDM, £6 main line on that. That's Daywood TDR. Usual kind of stuff that you'll see me use for bomb fishing. Nice little short 9-foot rod, as we're only chucking to a little point of an island over there where we'll be looking to loose feed a few 6mm pellets. Again, I'll run through that as the session goes on. But in terms of the terminal tackle of the rig, dead simple as always with all my sort of feeder fishing and bomb fishing. Just got a nice little heavy size 21 gram bomb. Reason behind this is we're going to be casting quite a decent weight on the hook. Once we've put a pellet on there and loaded it with the fibre paste that we'll show you shortly, it's going to weigh a bit, so a heavy bomb means that the rig's not going to cartwheel through the air and tangle. A nice square lead as well, holds bottom, especially when you're fishing against a slope. In terms of the actual rig, as you can see, they've got a twizzle boom, couple of stots and a loop-to-loop connection. Dead simple as always, and that's down to an 0.15 hook length, to a size 16 Guru QM1 and a bait band on there, and quite a long hair as you can see to the band. Might be a bit difficult to pick up on camera, but by comparison to what I tend to use with pellets, that's quite a long hair, and again, that's purely because we're going to be wrapping a bit of paste around that, so a nice big visual bait, pretty much looking really to catch both carp and barbel today and avoid a lot of the smaller fish that are in this lake. So I'll just pop this to one side, and then we'll have a quick look at the pole rigs. The pole's where it gets a little bit more complicated. Again, there's a couple of things that you need to look at with pole fishing, is the conditions, the depth, and also the type of paste that you're going to be using. Today we're looking to use quite a soft paste, so that also dictates the way that we've shotted the rig. So as I say, it's quite complicated in terms of like explaining it, but realistically the principles are fairly simple. I've got a couple of rigs set up for fishing the pole. Distance wise today we're fishing about sort of 12.5 metres, something like that. And the reason why we fish there, as you can see, it's a nice open water section of the lake is this, but you have to find an absolutely flat bottom to fish on. Paste is one of those baits that's a bit different from sort of pellets and things like that, where you're looking to fish on a hard bottom, usually on say at the base of a slope or halfway up to an island, something like this. With paste it's completely different. You're looking for a completely flat bottom so as the paste doesn't roll and move, and basically the reason why is because you're fishing a tight line from the float right down to the paste. There's no sort of leeway in terms of the depth of the rig. Again, these are things that I'll keep reiterating in terms of plumbing up and marking up the depth on the pole, but we'll quickly run through the rig first and then we'll talk a bit more about how we actually go about using it when we're plumbing up. In terms of the top end, both top kits are exactly the same. We've got double 8 in the top end, perfect elastic for all round carp fishing, especially in open water, nice and strong as well if we do hook some decent fish, because it's a doubled up elastic, nice and soft on the strike. Dacron connector as usual, and that's just down to an 0.19 main line. Nice strong main lines when you're fishing with paste, purely because you're actually going for decent sized fish. The bait's nice and heavy, so there's no real finesse really required. It's mainly just making sure that the rig's nice and durable. As you can see there, nice long line above the pole tip, between the pole tip and float, and that's with 3 nice number 8s back shot, nice and heavy, which again, because of the wind that you'll see behind us and because we're fishing a long line, it means that we're just able to hold that float nice and still, so it's not sat at an angle, again keeping the rig nice and stable. The reason why I've gone for a very long line, apart from the wind, is because we're using pole pots on the end of the pole to deposit paste. Again, that's going to catch the wind a bit more, so the pole is going to inherently wave around more, so you need to have a nice long line to make sure you're not moving the float and ripping the hook out the paste. But then obviously you need to incorporate backshot to counter that. In terms of the floats, I'm using on both rigs Frenzy FP 900s. These are a discontinued pattern, but any pattern with a really long bristle, buoyant bristle will do. Nice small body, so again, not a massive amount of shock capacity, but it's a line through body with a spring eye. Again, going back to what I was saying about heavy main lines, you're catching big fish, there's no point going for anything with finesse, so as long as the float's nice and durable, that's the main thing. One thing that I've also been sort of like careful with when choosing this float is making sure that the stem runs into the actual bristle of the float. Again, because you're using very long bristles on with paste, if you do foul hook a fish or you lose one, there's a liability for that float bristle to fold over. As you can see, because the stem runs halfway up the bristle there, it's almost impossible for that bristle to fold and break, which I've had on a couple of other patterns that I've used in the past. 3 float rubbers on there set nice and tight, and that comes down again to the accuracy, and there's a number 10 shot just underneath that. Again, I'll point out more about that when we're actually plumbing up. Moving down the rig, it's just a case of 3 number 10 shot in this case. On the other rig it's number 9s, but I'll explain about that in a second. And that just comes down to an 0.17 hook length in this case to a size 12 Camazan animal, a nice big hook. Again, you can mask the hook with paste, so there's no point going for small hooks. However, one thing that I will say while I've set up a second rig is because there's a few F1s in this lake, and if it turns out that there's quite a lot of those in the peg, I've set up basically a duplicate rig, identical in every aspect, but I've just got a smaller hook and a slightly lighter hook length on this. It's a size 16 Camazan animal down to 0.15 and number 9 shot in this case. So the float, one thing that we've got to point out as well with paste fishing is the float's always half shotted, or just probably 2/3 shotted. In this case I've got it nearly shotted to capacity, purely because I'm going to be using a smaller bit of paste, so I don't want the float to immediately rip the hook out the paste. So just shotting the float down that little bit more means it's still going to work the same as any other paste rig, but I can get away with using smaller bits of paste on this. So as I say, those are the rigs looked at. Dead simple really. Like I say, there's a few little things that I've added in there just to make the fishing of the rig a bit better in terms of the wind and things like that. But as I say, we'll cover those in a second when we plumb up the rig. But now we're going to have a quick look at bait prep and show you the bait that we're going to use today. There's several different kinds of paste that you can use, so we'll show you how to prepare those now, just a bit further up the bank. Right, so like I say, we're now going to prepare the paste. In terms of what you'd normally do when you get to a peg or on a session or a match, you tend to do this first, but as I say, because we've got the cameras with us today, we've set the gear up first, and we're now going to do the bait prep. So it's a bit the wrong way around, but as I say, like any sort of bait, you want to leave it to settle and take on the water. So as I say, it's one of those things that we've just got to negotiate today. The first thing that I'll point out is there's several different kinds of paste that you can fish with. Personally, the only paste that I tend to use is just green swim stim when I'm pole fishing, and that's pretty much covers me for every eventuality. However, there's other different kinds of paste you can get. Stuff like the green swim stim pre-made paste, say if you sort of can't be bothered or you've not got as much time, you can always just grab a tub of this, and as I say, it's ready straight off the bat. The thing with that paste, as you can see, it's a lot stiffer than what you'll see us mix the swim stim ground bait into. And obviously, when you're fishing paste, what you want to do is get away with sort of the sloppiest paste you can really. Ultimately that means you're going to hook more fish, because obviously it's easier to strike the hook through the paste. So as I say, that's one looked at. The other one's the one that we're going to actually use on the bottom, and that's a fibre paste. The one we're going to use today is Sonia Bates krill fibre paste. Completely different consistency and different way of mixing it, as you'll see. The clue's in the name, it's a fibrous paste, so that means it's got a lot of binding properties, a lot of fibres for the hook to grip to, and equally when you're putting it around a pellet, that'll grip it as well, so it's staying on, so it basically means that you can cast it. There's no way that you could cast with a piece of, say, the swim stim ground bait paste that we're going to mix up. You couldn't cast with that at all, but with this you can. So as I say, we'll crack on and mix them up now. The first one that we're going to mix up is the swim stim. The key thing is you do this effectively the wrong way around from ground bait, or the way that I mix it up anyway. So you're actually adding the ground bait to water. So first thing to do, get some lake water, about as much as you're going to need, probably about a pint or so. If we, like I say, we're going to fish it for a few hours today, so I'm going to mix up a fair bit, but it's nice and simple to mix. So you can, you know, say if you run out, you've always got time to mix a bit more up. And it's just a simple case of adding the ground bait to the water. As you can see there, it looks a bit strange because it's the wrong way around, but just gradually mixing that in. And as I say, because it's almost like a slop or over wetted ground bait, you've got to let this settle and give the particles plenty of time to absorb the water. It's amazing how much it will thicken up. If you mix it, say, to the consistency where you're almost ready to fish with it, before you've actually let it settle. Then by the time you come to fish with it, it'll have gone a bit too stiff and a bit too grainy, and it's more likely to sort of break up off the hook. And as I say, if you create it too stodgy, then you're going to miss a lot of bites as well. So you can see there, you're sort of mixing it into a consistency kind of like porridge almost. But as you can see, it's still very runny. There's no way that I can actually pick that up. So that's almost there really. Just need a little bit more ground bait. Again, not tons, and it's always worth just taking your time with it. As you can see, as soon as I've added that small amount there, it's immediately started to bind a lot more. And again, it's just a case of working that round in the bait tub. One thing that you'll see also next to my seat box is an atomizer. Now, I always carry one of those when it comes to paste fishing, especially on warm days. Not so much today, but quite often what will happen is your paste will dry out a little bit over the course of the session, so it's always worth having an atomizer there. You can just slightly over wet it and tweak the mix as the day goes on. As you can see though, that's almost there now. It's just starting to bind. As you can see, it's an absolute slop at the moment, but what'll happen in about an hour's time, once I've left that to one side, it'll be the absolute perfect consistency for paste fishing. As you can see there, not quite stiff enough yet, but it's amazing how much that will stiffen up as time goes on. So like I say, that's the swim stim paste mixed up. As you can see, from a pint of water, you don't need much ground bait at all to that, and that's nearly sort of a pint and a half of bait mixed up, and that's absolutely perfect. The next thing we'll look at is the fibre paste. Now, this isn't something that I tend to use a lot. More, it's a case of just looking at different kinds of paste for today's video, so just brought some along to try it. But again, we'll see how good it is. Equally, something like this you could use on rivers, say when you're straight lead fishing for barbel, stuff like that. So it's something to consider. But this is completely different. As you can see, what we're going to do is actually mix this more sort of in line with traditional ground bait. What you'll see there's much bigger particles. It's almost like oatmeal, and that's why it's got its sort of fibrous content. So what we'll just do is add it little bit by bit with the water. And again, this is just basically doing what we did with the other paste, but the opposite way around, sort of just gradually bringing it to the consistency rather than waiting for it. As you can see, as soon as you put some water in it, immediately that's gone incredibly stodgy. So you've just got to work with it nice and steadily. And like I say, this is sort of the other way around. You're slowly bringing this to a softer consistency rather than making it firmer from the start. As you can see, I'm not going to mix tons of this up today, purely because it's only going round a straight lead with a small pellet. Say if I was using, say, 10mm pellets and putting a big piece on, then I'd certainly add quite a bit more to it. As you can see now, just mixing that up steadily, and that's starting to come together quite nicely. Again, a bit harder than sort of the swim stim paste to mix up. But equally, what I'm going to do is over wet this again, similar kind of thing. And obviously, same principle as with the previous one. It's going to absorb the water, and that's going to create the mix. So you always want it slightly on the wetter side to what you're going to be fishing with it as, if that makes any sense. As you can see, that's coming together really nicely now. I don't think it'll need any more water, will that? And that should start to bind. And like I say, you can see much more fibrous. So once these have settled, we'll give them, as I say, probably half an hour or so. Get a few other baits prepared, and those should be perfect to use on the hook for pole fishing and for the straight lead. So as I say, we'll leave those to settle now. Hopefully that's given you an idea about how to mix up various kinds of paste and the options that we've got on our side tray today. And as I say, we'll now put them into practice once we've plumbed up and show you exactly how they work in the peg. Right, so now that we've done the introduction into paste fishing and prepared the bait, I'm now going to sort of explain how we go about employing paste on a peg such as this. One thing that I mentioned in the intro is the area of the lake that we're actually fishing. As you can see, it's a nice open water area. Purely we've picked that, so we've got a bit of a bomb chuck to show you another method. But the main thing is when you're fishing on the pole is you need to find a flat bottom. The key thing is, to say, an absolutely flat bottom. The problem is on a lot of commercials is that's where the silt's going to collect, obviously with the disturbance of the fish, so you're going to end up with a very silty area, and it's an area of the peg 99% of the time when you're fishing with traditional particle baits that you'll avoid like the plague, purely because you just get liners fizzing in your peg and it's a nightmare. But that's where paste comes into its own. When you end up with a peg and a flat area where it gets absolutely fizzing when you're feeding sort of ground bait, pellets, whatever it might be, that's where paste has its is the best basically. It's somewhere in the peg that you wouldn't really fish any other bait, but like I said, that's the advantage of paste really. in terms of where we've had to plumb up today, I've had to go quite far out, as I say, about 12.5 metres to find out where it flattens off completely. As I say, the difference between about 6 metres up to 12.5 is about 2 inches, but that, again, that's a bit too much of a slope to be fishing on. As I say, it's all about accuracy with paste, and that comes down to plumbing up. So that's where we've gone to fish the paste. There's about, like I say, 12.5 metres. As the session wears on, we might come a bit closer, or we might fish down the edge with it, but the bulk of today's session is going to be with the straight lead and then on the pole with paste. I'll quickly run you through, because obviously I will have plumbed up because it's a bit time consuming, but initially when you are plumbing up on the pole, you need to have a selection of plummets with you when you're paste fishing. The only reason for that is purely to find the depth of the silt. Now, it's all well and good fishing with a silt plummet, but sometimes with paste, especially when there's a lot of fish in your peg, what will happen is they'll actually burrow into the silt, and if it's a very soft bottom on the lake, you can end up with a change in depth as the session goes on, because you're looking for a lot of activity in the peg of up to sort of 2, maybe 3 inches in some cases. And what you need to do at the start of the session is identify how deep the silt is, so you know as the session progresses as to why your float's sinking. As I say, because the peg can get deeper. So I always carry a selection of plummets ranging from 10 grams right up to 30, and what I start with is a nice heavy, fairly thin 30 gram plummet, and I'm dropping that in as heavy as I can, and I'll sort of demonstrate that now. The reason behind that is I'm looking to try and get that plummet to actually bed into the silt to tell me how deep the silt is, and also it'll give you a truer reading of the contours of the lake bed. Again, when you're chucking a 10 gram plummet around, because it'll sit on sort of rocks and various bits of debris on the bottom, you're not going to get the truest reading. So the reason for a 30 gram plummet gives you the truest reading of depth, and it also tells you how deep the silt is. As I say, I've already plumbed up these rigs, so it's no fluke that they're absolutely bang on. And it's one thing that when you're paste fishing you have to spend plenty of time doing is plumbing up. So like I say, I've ship out to about 12.5 metres and line up with a far bank marker. Again, a nice small far bank marker, so like I say, I'm bang in line with where I want to be. And you can see there, once the float's settled, that's how I've got it dotted down to an absolute pimple. Because the bristle's nice and thick on these frenzy floats, what you basically got then is you've got plenty of buoyancy there, so you don't need to have plenty of bristle showing for it to pull effectively against the paste and give a decent bite registration. So as you can see, that's how I've plumbed up there. But what I do when I'm plumbing up is drop the plummet in and make sure that I've got basically the plummet's got plenty of time to accelerate through the water to bed into the silt. And one thing that you'll be able to feel rather than see is when you're pulling against the plummet, just how much it sticks in the bottom. You can see there, it just sticks ever so slightly. So the lake bed there actually isn't that silty by comparison to a lot of venues that you'll fish, but there's a decent bit of silt there, probably I'd say maybe ½ an inch deep, something like that. So as the session goes on, I might have to deepen off by ½ an inch, possibly an inch if I get a load of fish in the peg. Once I've plumbed up with a 30 gram plummet, which is obviously way heavier than the piece of paste that you're going to be using, what I then do is switch from that to a 10 gram plummet, and this is going to sit on top of the silt for the time being and mimic the actual weight of the paste that you're going to be using. So again, say if you're using really small bits of paste, it might be worth using, say, an SSG shot to imitate it. You can see a much smaller plummet, and what you might be able to just see on the camera is when I plumb up in line with my far bank marker again, is the float will sit ever so slightly higher, and as I say, that's purely because it's not bedding into the silt as much. And this is the point when you're adjusting your float to get it to sit perfectly for when the paste is on the actual hook, when you're actually fishing with it. As you can see there, just lower that in, and you can see the float sits probably, like say, ½ an inch, maybe ¼ of an inch higher in the water, and that's perfect for what we're wanting to do with the paste today. Again, like I say, when you're plumbing up with a 30 gram, find the depth of the silt and the contours of the lake bed, then put on a 10 gram plummet or a lighter plummet, and that's where you set your depth in terms of where you want the float to sit when you're actually fishing with the paste. So it's a little bit more time consuming than the usual way of plumbing up, but it's absolutely crucial to make sure that you've always got the correct tension of line between the float and the paste, and equally making sure that you've not got too much bristle showing where you're going to end up missing loads of bites and pulling out the paste, but equally you don't want too little brittle showing so you can't really see it, and it's just going under at the slightest indication. So as I say, you've got to take your time to set that bristle right, but once you've got it then like I say, it'll mean that you're foul hooking less fish and ultimately hitting more bites and putting more weight in your net. So as I say, that's plumbing up covered. In terms of marking that on the pole then, this is really important then, because you don't want your float to move. As I've already mentioned at the start, nice tight float rubbers to make sure it stays where it is. But I mark at every point I can on the float in terms of where that refers to on the top kit. So in terms of the top of the bristle, the base of the bristle and the base of the float. And then one thing that I always do, and I mentioned on the other rig as well, is I've put a number 10 shot, not a stot. That's crucial because shot don't move on the line like stots do, right beneath the float, and that'll basically tell me immediately if that float's moved. So say if it's only a 1/4 inch like that, I can look at it and say, rather than having to look to the reference point on the pole where it sort of looks like ballpark figure, I know exactly how much that float's moved. So it's just a case of moving that back down to the shot like so. I know then that my float's sat absolutely perfectly and I'm ready to fish again. Obviously when you're catching big fish, that's when your float can move up and down the line. So it's important that you use as many reference points on your pole to make sure that you're always bringing the float back and basically saving your time at the end of the day. Again, meaning you're spending more time out there rather than faffing around having to re-plumb. So like I say, that's plumbing of paste done. And that's, like I say, pretty much it really. Paste comes down to the area of the peg that you choose to fish, the plumbing up, and then the preparation of the bait itself. Once you've got all those right, it's fairly straightforward. One thing that I will note though is feeding with paste, which is one thing I've talked about with a few people, what they feed, and sort of the general consensus, if you can get away with just using paste by itself, then that's great. But one thing that I always like to do, because I like to feed quite aggressively, is put a bed of bait down there. Now one thing that you'll quite often see people do is you'll see them feed pellets by hand, and that's what we did in the previous video. What I found then is lots of line bites and problems with fish coming up off bottom. On a day like this where I've seen a lot of fish top in what is a fairly deep peg, I want to nail them to the deck because that's where they're going to find the paste. I want them looking down all the time. So I'm actually going to put in a bed of ground bait there. As you can see, swim stim green again, shows the versatility of the bait really, and that's mixed with margin carp, probably in a ratio of 2 parts swim stim to 1 part margin carp. Purely the margin carp's in there because it's a really heavy mix, in an inert mix, and it's going to stay on the bottom, and that's where I want the fish to be. In there you can see it looks a bit lumpy, but that's not actually because I've not riddled the bait. I always do that. These are actually 8mm swim stim green pellets that I've left to soak for about 45 minutes to an hour. And the crucial thing is, with this lake especially, there's a lot of small fish, roach, skimmers and things like that, and I don't want those in the peg. What I want is to leave a nice bed of bait down there that's going to keep the carp and the bigger fish grubbing around. So 8mm pellets, once they soak, go to near a sort of like 10mm, but they're going to break down nice and quick and create a nice bed of attractant, as I say, based around sort of swim stim green, all the ingredients in that on the bottom, so it'll create a nice carpet. I'm going to probably put in 4 or 5 balls of that in sort of smallish balls so they break up nice and quick, then start on the straight lead, and that's how we're going to kick off the session. So like I say, we've probably got about 5 hours. It's about 11:15 in the morning now, so we'll kick off the session, get this fed and get the straight lead out there and crack on with the 5 hours and see what we can put in the net. Right, so like I say, that's everything looked at in terms of what we're going to do today. So it's now time to start feeding the peg and kick off. In terms of what I'm going to do, as I said, I'm going to start with 2 lines. A bomb line over there, and that's purely used to let my main pellet line settle, or my main sort of paste line settle, sorry. So I'm just going to ping a couple of pouchfuls of pellet out towards the point of that island, put a little bit of a bed of bait down. Again, when you're pellet fishing on the bomb especially, you're not looking to feed really regularly, so 2 or 3 decent pouchfuls and then just leave it. Again, you don't want to be drawing fish up in the water, and then it's a case of feeding that paste line. As I said, I'm looking to put down a bed of bait, and what I've done from that ground bait that I showed you, I've made 5 balls of bait, as you can see, not squeezed them particularly hard, so they're ready to break up nice and quick. And ultimately what I'm waiting for is for the peg to start fizzing. When it starts fizzing, I'll leave it probably 15 or 20 minutes, and that's going to let the fish settle. But basically I'm feeding quantity bait because I want the fish to give themselves away that they've settled over it. The bomb's purely there to try and pick up a few fish and show you how to use a fibre paste. But basically I'm leaving that main paste line for as long as I can before I go on it. So we'll get these 5 balls of bait cupped in. As always with any ground baiting or any sort of aspect to this style of fishing, making sure that you're nice and accurate is the first point of consideration. So I'm using a marker on my pole, Again, that's the nice thing about this this particular pole, is it's got markers on the 13 metre section right up to the 16 metre section that are about sort of 1 foot increments, so I know exactly where my bait's going. So the first bit of bait I'm going to put in is going to be bang on where I plan on putting my paste, as you can see there. But I'm actually going to spread the others around just ever so slightly, because I don't want the fish sort of on a sixpence really, because that's when you're going to end up with them smashing into the rig, knocking the paste off a bit too much. So I want them to sort of browse around a little bit. But again, I want to make sure that I'm doing that at exactly the same distance, so that's why I'm using that reference point on my pole. So I can move the bait left to right a little bit should I want to, because I've plumbed up there as well, as I say, making sure it's a perfectly flat area to fish on. Again, easier said than done. We're having to double unship here today as well because of the banking behind us, and especially in this wind, so it's going to be a bit time consuming, so I don't think we'll show you putting all 5 balls of ground bait in. So the principle's the same with all of them, spreading them out ever so slightly, and again just using that far bank marker and my distance marker on my pole. Just wait for the wind to die down a little bit, and then pop the bait in the peg like so. So we'll crack on and get the other 3 in, and every time I'm shipping the pole back as well, I'm going to put another couple of pouchfuls of pellet out in line with my bomb line, and as I say, just keep that fed, and then hopefully once that's done we'll have a chuck on there and catch a couple of fish. Right, as soon as you've seen there, we've deposited those 5 balls in at about 12.5 metres, and that's prime for our main line of attack that we're going to fish today. But while those are settling, as I say, waiting for that to start fizzing, we're going to have a chuck on the straight lead. In terms of what we've got in there, just a nice small 6mm Sonia Bates krill pellet, and that sort of matches with the flavour of the paste that we're using. As you can see now, that's gone really nice and fibrous. So we're going to just wrap a small piece around the pellet there. So it's much easier when using bigger hooks and bigger bits of and bigger pellets, sorry. But in terms of what we're doing today, there's sort of quite a few F1s in here, smaller fish, so just trying to get a bit of everything into the peg. So as you can see there, just wrapping that around the pellet and a bit around the hook as well. So it's a bit fiddly with the wind and stuff like that. As you can see, that's clinging onto the pellet quite nicely there, and around the hook as well. It's just moulding that into a small ball. Like I say, what that'll do once it's into the peg is just break down nice and steady and just create a little bit more of an attractant around that pellet. So we'll get that cast out there now. As you can see, that's why we go for a heavy bomb as well on this line, purely to make sure that you're not casting the weight of the paste. Again, when you're using sort of 8mm pellets, size 12 hooks and bigger bits of paste around the hook, as we might end up doing later, that's when it'll come into its own using a much heavier lead. But in this case, again, it's just one of those things that you've got to consider, that you're not casting something that's going to cartwheel through the air and tangle. So it's a nice gentle cast. Hit the clip, and as you can see, just feather that in right over where we've been feeding. As you can see there, you could see from the 2 plops that the paste stayed on the hook. Again, when you're really punching the paste out using a much bigger lead, fishing greater distances, you might have to mix it a little bit stodgier than that. But all I'm doing over that is just feeding a couple of pouchfuls, say 8 to 10 pellets, something like that, and just creating a bit of an area of feed off the point of that island. As I say, it's a nice steady way of starting a session, is this, just creating a little bit of a better feed, and that one little sort of pellet that's a little bit different with the paste around it, a bit more attractant there, and sort of acts like a bit of a ground bait, just sort of hopefully will buy us a quicker bite if anything. So similar kind of principles to how I'd be like feeder fishing, is I'll wait for that for about 5 minutes and have a recast. As I say, just making sure that paste breaks down and creates a little bit of a bed, just add a line bite straight away. Again, all the while, especially if there's small fish present as well, they'll be pecking at that bit of paste, creating a bit of activity in the peg and releasing the scent into the water. And one thing that it can be useful for, especially if there's like a lot of skimmers and small fish in a peg, is mixing that paste really heavily, or really stodgy, sorry, and create almost like a conker almost round both the hook and the paste, so making it a much more selective bait, so you can still get away with them with using, say, 8mm pellets, something like that. but then effectively making a bait that's near a 15mm by wrapping it in paste. Again, you can use the pre-mixed paste for that same kind of thing as well. As I say, hopefully it won't be too long before we start getting a few proper bites. Again, just a couple of pouchfuls of pellet. Don't want to go feeding too regularly because that'll just draw fish up in the water, and that's when a pellet wagger would be better. But because we're fishing in an area of the lake which, say, when leading around, it's probably about 1.5 feet deep, something like that. Perfect depth for this technique. And then it's just a case of waiting for a bite. Looking out over my ground bait as well, where I've put that in, and say it's been about sort of 10 minutes since the first ball went in. I'm seeing a bit of fizzing there already, and that's from the ground bait itself breaking up. When it starts to really sort of, you see a lot of bubbles and things like that, that's the fish actually rummaging through the silt, trying to find those particles of both like the margin carp and the 8mm pellets that will be breaking down there as well. As I say, that's what you're looking for, is the fish to be initially attracted into that ground bait and then start going down and burrowing through it all, kicking up a load of the ground bait off the bottom, and like I say, just getting a lot of activity going in the peg. So hopefully it won't be too long before that starts to really fizz, and then we can get down there with the paste. But while we're fishing away with this, one thing that I will quickly note as well, which again we'll cover when we're actually fishing with the pole, is a quick thing that I mentioned earlier on about the markers on the 13-metre section of my my Sensor's pole. Is one thing that I do take note of, and it's essential when you are paste fishing, is how far the pot is from the end of the pole tip. As you can see there, obviously we'll show when the rig's being shipped out how far that is, and how the rig hangs, because that's one thing to consider when you're actually shotting up your rig and positioning things on the rig itself. But you have to have this pot set quite far back from the pole tip to prevent angles when you're shipping out. But it's important, and one thing you don't see many people do is taking note of exactly the distance from the pole tip to the actual paste pot. One thing that I have done with this, I say it's a fantastic little feature on these poles, is they've got markers all along the sections, and they're at increments, as you can see, numbered from 1 to 5. And you'll see there what I've done is measured up the distance between one of the markers, say where the pole pot is, to the marker on the pole. So I know when I'm fishing or dropping the bait in, say I'm fishing at number 5 on the section where I've plumbed up, I need to ship out to about number 2, drop the paste in, and then ship the section back. Again, that's going to pull the pole, the float, sorry, directly under the pole tip, and everything will be presented properly. So it's one thing to consider. As I say, we'll put it into practice when we're actually fishing, and show you how the rig hangs and basically how I go about shipping out past, potting in, and then shipping back. But one thing that, as I say, is worth noting is using a marker on your pole, the sections lower down, and using that in reference to the distance between the pole pot and the pole tip. Again, like I say, with this video today, with it being paste fishing, we're trying to cram in as much detail as we possibly can. So like I say, there's going to be loads of little tips like that chucked in there today for good measure. And as I say, you'll see them demonstrated as we're actually fishing with the paste, both on the straight lead and the pole as well. Right, so just going to reel in now on the bob. It's not been particularly productive on this. As I say, we've had to make a couple of changes and scale down in the size of the bob, just to avoid spooking fish, and like I say, it's just not really produced that well. But as I say, the main thing is that it's given us time for our main line to settle at sort of 12.5 metres on the pole. So I've seen a couple of bubbles come up there and seen it fizz just a little bit. Again, it's a bit harder to see when it's sort of with a bit of a breeze on it as it is today. But it's given me enough of an idea that there could be a couple of fish down there to be caught. So I'm going to actually start off on the heaviest rig, as you can see, with a nice large pole pot on the end. I'm going to start on that swim stim paste. As I say, that's settled nicely now. But a couple of things that I will have to point out as I'm just sort of preparing the rig is how we go about shipping the rig out. One important consideration, obviously, when you should be having to be careful shipping out with the paste in the pot on the end of the pole, is having your rollers set correctly. So anytime you're fishing sort of over 11 metres, it's always worth having a couple of rollers set behind you, making sure that it's nice and easy to ship the pole out, as we'll demonstrate. What we'll do now, as I say though, is quickly get some bait on the hook. As I say, I'm starting on the heavier rig with the size 12 hook. And all it is with paste is a case of getting a decent lump. As I say, we're going for decent sized fish today, sort of carp, and trying to avoid the skimmers. So a piece about that kind of size is ideal to start with. You can go obviously quite a lot larger. Then what I tend to do is just lay the hook outside of the paste before folding it round, and I'll explain this in a second. So it's just a case then of moulding the paste round and flattening the bottom out like so. And what I'm trying to create is that shape there, with the hook right on the bottom and imitating as closely as possible the plummet that we've used to plumb up with, say, being really nice and accurate. So just flattening the bottom of the paste, and that should hopefully sit down there like a plummet. Rather than rolling around, it'll stay nice and stable, as I say, give a true reading on the float. One thing as well that's always worth noting is the side that you actually put the rig in terms of which way you're going to have to tip the pole to release the rig. So I know in this case the line's going round, say, my right hand side of the pole, so I've got to tip it that way to tip the paste out. Again, the last thing you want to be doing is tipping it the other way and just effectively losing the paste and wasting the time shipping out. One thing we'll have a quick look at though while we've got the rig here is how that actually sits when we've got the paste in the pot, and this is a crucial consideration why I was earlier saying about having the paste sat quite, or the pot, sorry, sat quite far back on the pole tip. What I like to do is have the shot just about level with the float, and as you can see, the line then beneath that sits in a nice U shape, and with the little shot beneath the stem of the float there, you can see it hangs the float down without it coiling over. Again, one thing that you've got to consider is when you're using back shot as well, it's another bit of weight on the line that can tangle, but ultimately when you've got your paste rig set like that, that's what you're trying to achieve, is making sure that it's nice and easy to ship out without it tangling. So we'll get that out into the peg now. As I say, especially when you're shipping out at a fair distance as we are today, you don't want to be wasting time having to ship back in and out because the paste keeps coming off. So it's worth just taking your time, shipping out nice and carefully until you reach your marker, which, as I said earlier, in this case is one of the numbers on the pole section. I said I'm fishing at where it says number 5, but the distance that I've got to go past that mark, because of the distance back that the pole pot is from the end of the pole, is down to a mark which is the number 2. So just have to find that once the wind calms down a bit, and it'll just be a case of depositing the bait into the peg. Again, I'm not looking to rush, purely because there's quite a bit of wind on the lake today. So there's my marker. It's just a case of lining up with the far bank and allowing the paste to go in. And all you're having to do is just lift the rig up as the paste is falling and just bring that back over the top of where the paste should have gone in. So not ideal with the wind. You can see there that that float's now registering against the paste. So one thing that I'll see as soon as that paste is off the hook, getting a couple of indications already, is the float should pop up and show full bristle. And that tells me that the paste is off. Again, a bit difficult in the wind when trying to get the paste in, especially how it blows the pole tip around. There's a bit of an indication there. There's definitely a few fish in the peg. Right, there's a bite and a fish on straight away. As you can see, really sharp bite on the paste. Might have been able to see on the initial bit there, little bit of a dip on the float, and then those really quick sort of wallops under. That's what we're looking for on the paste. That tells you that the fish is actually taking it. So an incredibly quick bite that. Wasn't quite expecting one that soon, but as I say, what I wanted to do was try and explain how the float starts to behave in the peg. Looks like a decent fish already, this. Like I say, that's the first drop in that we've had. Nice little F1. Again, we'll just try and get him out the net. Hopefully we're ideally looking for a sort of a bigger stamp of carp than that, but so the paste should catch everything. The hook's just dropped out in the net, but it was nailed right in the top lip. Lovely and lively fat F1. So we'll get him popped in the net and we'll get back out there and hopefully get another one. As I say, hopefully on the next chuck we'll be able to explain a bit more about what's going on with the float as it's in the peg. But as I say, because that fish had that bait so quickly and confidently, didn't really get a chance to explain what was going on there. But again, it's just a case of repeating the process. One thing that I'll notice, I always have a tub of water next to me. It just makes handling the paste that bit easier. And as the session goes on, it might be a case of having to use much bigger bits of paste. I think I'll try one a bit bigger this time round. So again, just getting a decent sized bit of paste. Like I said, laying the hook outside of the paste, moulding it round the actual line itself into a bit of a sort of a cone shape, if you like, flattening the bottom as you can see like that. And then that's perfect. So just popping that into the pole pot, washing your hands. As I say, the last thing you want to be doing is putting loads of ground bait around your pole, because that'll make shipping in and out a lot harder. And it's just a case of getting this into the peg now. Say one thing you can do as well, especially because we're using large pole pots on the end, you can introduce a few pellets and loose offerings with it, but as I say, the way that I've looked to fish it today is to get a big bed of bait down there initially and not have to refeed basically. Again, finding that marker on the pole, lining up with the far bank, releasing the paste into the peg, then shipping back while that's falling down and letting the rig settle. As you can see, the peg's absolutely fizzing now. And as you can see, I've just given myself that little bit more bristle to read. Loads of activity on the float. It looks like a fish has already smashed that paste off the hook. As you can see how the float popped up again. No, it's on. Smaller fish. Again, there's that many fish down there that sometimes they are sort of catching the line on their fins and pulling the float under as if the paste is off. Again, this is a skimmer actually this time. Thought it was fighting a bit different. That's why we had a little bit of a lift on the float. Again, it shows that paste catches everything, but equally those big bits of paste, real variety of fish to be caught. Again, on venues where it's sort of carp dominated, then that's what you'll catch, but somewhere like this where there's a healthy mix of pretty much everything that swims really, skimmers like this, there's proper carp to be caught, and even a few barbel as well, so never really know what you're going to catch on paste. But definitely I think it is time to start upping the size of the hook bait. I don't think that lighter rig will come into play at all today, being the fact that there's just that many fish down there. So I'm going to start using very large bits of paste, something like that, and hopefully that should get through to a few of the better fish in the peg. Again, as you can see, like serious bit of bait that, but again, for a big carp, that's not much really at all to take. So again, just popping that in the pole cup, and then just a case of shipping back out again. Again, just waiting for that float to settle and start to pull against the paste. There's another bite and another fish on. Just pulled out of that one. Proper bite though, that, and that felt like a bigger fish. Right, so a bit of an update. As you can see, we're about an hour and a half, 2 hours into the session now. We've had a few F1s and just one proper carp and a couple of skimmers as well, but I've had to make a few little adjustments to what we're doing in terms of, you know, coping with the conditions and whatnot. One thing that's been apparent is there's been just that many fish in the peg, especially F1s, which, as I said earlier, made hitting bites a lot harder. But one thing that I made a change to, just try and get through them, and immediately was rewarded with a decent carp, about 3 pound or so, is I've just added about ½ an inch or an inch to the depth, just to make sure there's a bit more bristle showing, so I can distinguish what's a proper bite a little bit easier. As I say, in most cases you won't have to do that, but because there's so many fish here, I'm actually waiting for the bristle to almost sit completely upright, showing full bristle, and then when it goes under, then that's pretty much what I'm waiting for. If the bristle is any lower than that, then it's just going under all the time and I can't really read it. The other thing I've done, as you can see, started adding a bit more paste to the actual pot, so putting much bigger bits of paste, and I've also taken one of the number 10 shot off the rig as well. Again, purely done that for the reason of having a bit more buoyancy for the float to pull against the paste, and again just getting a truer reading of what's going on down there. Especially if I'm getting lots of little bites, I want that float to pop up and, like I say, register against the paste as quickly as possible. So we'll just ship out now and have another go and hopefully see if we can sort of put that into practice and show you the difference that it's made. As I say, it's just been one of those with the amount of F1s and skimmers in the peg, just not really being able to see the bristle enough to read a proper bite, so it's been more by fluke when we've hooked fish properly. Again, just shipping out as usual to the marker. You can see the conditions are a bit nicer now, so it's calmed down, so it's much easier to actually get the bait out and present the rig properly. As you can see, as soon as that paste goes in, the bristle's moving around, and as I say, that's the problem that we've had earlier. As well as that, I've noticed, again, as I said at the start of the session about fish burrowing into the silt, it's been fizzing like mad out there, and even though I've added, say, an inch or so to the depth, the float's still dotted down a fair bit, which, say, shouldn't really be the case if we were fishing on the same sort of, oh, just missed that one, on the same level that we were at the start of the session. So they've definitely sort of dug out a bit of a hole where they've been rooting around for the ground bait. Again, still having to work through the odd miss bite, but it's just one of those things today. Again, one thing I've also experimented with as well is moving the shot down a little bit nearer to the hook, again just to try and stabilise that rig a little bit better. And again, it's all little adjustments like this that you've got to try and make. As you can see as well, working our way through that 1.5 pints of paste that we started with, there's not a great deal left yet at the moment, sorry, so might have to mix up a little bit more in a second. Right, so as you can see, we're a short way into the session now. Last update that we gave you, as I explained, was the fact that we were just getting plagued with F1s and small skimmers really on the main pace line at sort of 13 metres, and we've just had a bit more of that really, to be honest. We've not been able to get through to the proper carp that are down there. There's just too many F1s, and they're just smashing the bait to pieces really. So what I've done is, as you can see now, I've just chucked the bomb out with a bit of paste, with that fibre paste wrapped around it, just to see if we can nick a fish while we're explaining a couple of other bits and bats. As I say, it didn't really work initially to chuck to the island really with the pellets and paste. I think with a nice heavy bomb, the water was too shallow and I don't think the fish were there in great enough numbers, and with the wind as well, it's quite accurate, it's quite hard to achieve accurate feeding really. Like I said, then what we've done, we've come onto the pole, getting plenty of indication on the tip now. We've come onto the pole and it's worked quite well initially, and then we've caught a carp, and basically after that the F1s have just moved in massive numbers and created a real problem with getting a bait through. So what we've decided to do, being that we've probably got an hour or so left of the session, was we're going to feed down the edge. So I alluded to that earlier in the video, saying that we might come short or might try down the edge, and I've had a good plumb around in both areas. It's quite a big line bite, is that, by the looks of things. And basically there's quite a bit of a slope going out to where we're fishing sort of in open water, so I've opted not to fish there. So loads of line bites there, and again that was the problem that we were having when we were fishing the pool there. So because there's quite a bit of a slope going out there, I've decided not to fish there. What I've actually managed to find down to my left hand edge, at about 10.5 metres away, is a really nice flat area, about sort of 2 square foot in size, and it's absolutely flat as a table, so I think that's where we're going to fish our edge line. As you can see, the tip doesn't stop moving now with the amount of fish down there. But what it means is, because it's nice and flat, not on a slope, it means that we can get away with using the normal paste, if you like, rather than actually having to use, say, the ready-made or the fibre paste, although we will try those down there. And sort of, that might be a fish on, and it is. We might fish down there with different kinds of paste, but what I should be able to do, tiny little carp this, is we should be able to fish down there with the normal paste because it's nice and flat, so we should get a decent comparison between all three kinds and hopefully put a few fish in the net. As I say, depth wise down there, it's only about sort of 14 inches deep. It's a tiny little F1 carp, that. But it's perfect in that sense, because what it means is, because it's so shallow, the odds are that the F1s won't come down there in as greater numbers. As I say, they prefer slightly deeper water in my experience, and especially here as well, so hopefully it should be more selective from that point of view. Rather than having to use different baits to get through them, it should be an area for the peg where the carp will be happier to settle. So what we'll do, we'll get this popped to one side and get that fed. In terms of what I'm going to feed down that edge, it's exactly what I've fed in open water really. All I've done is over wetted the mix a little bit more to make it absolutely inert. And what I'll do, like with any edge fishing, is put in a good sort of 3 or 4 popfuls of that and leave it to settle for half an hour before going over it. So what I'll do is crack on with that now, get a bit of bait in that area of the peg, and as I say, prime it for a little bit later on. So as you can see, just going to deposit the bait in there, fairly tight to the bank, but just leaving myself a little bit of room to tuck that float in should I need to. Again, the good thing about using paste down the edge is you don't tend to foul hook quite as many fish with it. Again, because the hook point is masked usually, and especially if you're using quite a stodgy paste, you're not sort of nicking the fish really and them sort of catching themselves on the point of the hook, and that gives you a proper drag away bite, which can quite often happen when you're fishing down the edge, where the fish might pick up the hook, like I say, with their pectoral fin or the tail. So with paste fishing, because the hook point's masked, you should get a lot of sideways movement on the float, but when it does go under or downwards properly, then it should be a proper bite. So I'll crack on and get a few more potfuls of the bait in down the edge, and hopefully that should mean that it's nicely primed in half an hour's time to go down there. Like I say, try and get a few proper carp. Right, so now that I've fed that area of the peg, I'll quickly ship the pole back and run you through the rig that I've decided to use down there. One thing that I've not done yet is put the paste pot on the end of the pole, but that'll go on there as per usual, and again using the marking system on the pole just to make sure I'm sat right over the top of where the bait's meant to go. In terms of the rig, again, double 8 in the top end of the pole, no real need to go any heavier to be honest. And in terms of the actual lines and everything and hooks, it's exactly the same as the other paste rigs. 019 mainline, 017 hook length and a size 12 camsan animal. But a quick note, as you can see, it's very shallow there, so we can't use a normal paste float. But again, the float that I've chosen is one of these Preston, I think it's one of their carp patterns. It's basically a styrofoam style float, and exactly the same thing again. The stem actually runs into the bristle to make it a lot stronger, and by comparison to a lot of margin floats, that's got quite a nice long bristle, so again, able to read the bites. I've plumbed it up at absolute dead depth as per usual. Like I say, that should register bites perfectly, and again pop up ever so slightly when the paste is off. In terms of the shotting, I've just got a bulk down there, and again what I've done is undershotted the float by about a number 10 or so. Again, just making sure that I can register the paste on the bristle nicely. And as I say, it's as simple as that. 3 number 8 back shot as per usual to make sure I can hold the float nice and tight against the bank, and that's pretty much it. So it's just a case now of leaving that bait to settle for a short while, and then we'll go down there and hopefully catch a few on paste down the edge. Right, so it's been about 15 minutes or so since we've fed that edge line, so I'm going to have a quick look down there just with a bit of the normal paste Again, because we're fishing for decent fish, there's no point messing around, so I'm going to use a big bit of paste as we were in open water. And again, just moulding that into a bit more of a ball in this case. Again, and then just flattening out the bottom, as you can see. It doesn't have to be quite as streamlined because it's much shallower water. But just with a slightly flat bottom, as I say, just to make sure that the rig sits correctly. You can see, because the rig doesn't quite sit in its normal fashion like a proper paste rig, just have to be a bit more careful shipping out. But exactly the same principles apply of knowing which side the rig's laid in. See, the peg down there now is absolutely fizzing, but same principles apply. Slowly shipping out over the top so as not to spook the fish. Going slightly past. Then just depositing the bait where it needs to be. Then bringing the pole back. So we're looking for a really sharp under before we do strike. Because the paste is really nice and heavy, it acts sort of like an anchor to stabilise the rig. So especially when there's lots of tails and things like that bumping into the line, as you'll be able to see, the float's moving all the time, but I'm waiting for a really strong pull under before I strike into the fish. Right, and there's another fish on now. See, nice sharp under of the float there. It looks like this one's fairly hooked. See by the way it's shot off. Could be another F1. It doesn't feel like a massive fish, but equally there's a few barbel in here as well. Right, looks like a barbel this, and it is. Nice sized barbel on the paste. So a lovely stamp fish to catch, and a nice change from the F1s as well. It's a cracking fish. And you could see by the way he shot off then, as soon as I hooked him, it was fairly hooked. There's still plenty of energy left in him, so we'll just let him calm down before we slip the hook out. His nail's right in the bottom lip again. Absolutely perfect hook hole to get on a barbel, that. See, belting fish that. Like I say, paste doesn't only catch carp, we've had F1s on it, skimmers, now barbel today as well. It's a lovely stamp fish, that. So I think what I'll do, being that it looked like there's one or two fish down there, I might just have another dropping on paste before putting another pot full of bait. Again, just to see. One thing that you'll notice as well, key point, is that the rig's actually been moved there. Because we're fishing such a short rig, and the fact that he's actually gone through some reeds there a little bit, it's moved the shot up, so it's just a case of moving those back down. But again, the same way I've marked the pole here for the bristle, so it's just a case of lining that back up and making sure that I'm bang on depth again. Like I said, with paste fishing, absolutely crucial to plumb up correctly, so marking your pole up and top kit is essential. Because it's not a big float though, I will note that I've not put a shot beneath it, so I'm just using the marks on the pole there to make sure that the float's sat at the right depth. That's a cracking little fish to catch down the edge, and as I say, a nice little change. So again, just moulding up a nice sized piece of paste. If I was getting absolutely plagued by F1s down that edge, what I will mention is that's when I'd probably go into the fibre paste or the ready-made. Again, I've already mentioned that if it was a sloping bank, then I wouldn't use this sort of paste on it. I'd definitely have to look at using a fibre paste or sort of the ready mixed, or a much stiffer paste basically. But luckily we found a nice flat area which, you know, after about 5 minutes of fishing on it, an F1 and a barbel, and plenty of indication, shows that it's a perfect area to be catching fish. just seen another bubble come up there as well, so it might be a good idea not to have fed here. Or sorry, fed after that last fish. Yeah, there's definitely still a couple of fish down there. There's another one on now. See, little decisions like that, again, not something we've planned on covering today, but with regards to margin fishing, when you think there's 1 or 2 fish down there still to be caught, there's no point putting extra baiting on top of their heads. After catching one fish, I've gone straight back out with some paste on the hook and had one immediately. Not a big fish, could be an F1 or a little barbel or something. But that was absolutely immediate, that, and again, really nice, quick, sharp bite on the float there. Yeah, and it is an F1 this time, so I think I will go down there with another pot of bait after we land this fish. But one thing I will notice, well, there seemed to be a much better stamp of F1 down the edge compared to what we were catching out in open water. Let's get another pound or so in the net. So we'll get down there with another pot of bait. Like I say, hopefully try and get some bigger fish to settle again, like the barbel or possibly the odd carp as well. Can always feed a full pot full of bait down the edge just to make sure the fish settle. So I'm sure if I went down there now just with another piece of paste, I'd probably catch another F1, because they could have shoaled up down there, but ideally I want to have enough bait down there to try and hold a few better fish, like I say, carp and decent barbel, stuff like that. I think because we're running out of the normal paste as well, might get another couple of chucks on that. We might have a couple of tries with the fibre paste and with the ready-made stuff as well, just to give a bit of variation to what we're doing down the edge. So we've probably only got another hour or so before we call it sort of like an end to the 5-hour stint, but so it's been an interesting little session today. Sort of trying out 1 or 2 different things and trying to get across a few tips on paste fishing. As I say, we've not been able to really put it into practice because of the sheer number of F1s that have been in the peg as opposed to proper carp, but it's just one of those things on the day. So again, another decent lump of paste. See, that peg's absolutely fizzing and there's plenty of tail patterns down there as well. So there's no shortage of fish to be caught down there. And one thing I'll note as well, as yet, might be tempting fate a little bit, but missed 1 bite and hooked 3 fish all properly, not a single foul hooked fish, which again, I think a lot of that does come down to paste fishing. I'm sure if I was fishing, say, worm or dead maggots down there, I'd run the risk of foul hooking a few of these fish. But paste fishing, it's nice and easy, especially down the edge, to distinguish a proper bite as opposed to a liner. As I said about the bait, masking the hook point as well. There's loads of tail patterns down there now. Right, there's one on. See, another really sharp bite. The fish are absolutely lined up now down that edge. Looks like another F1 this. See, the proper carp seem to have been quite elusive today. But it's incredibly good sport fishing down that edge now. See, a bite chuck within next to no time really. And just using the puller kit. Nice and steady, and the fish come up right in front of you then. Another nice stamp F1. See, one of the older fish, that really good stamp, and he's had that paste well down. Shows the level of competition down there. See, another lovely fish to get. So pop him in the net. I think again we won't feed this time round. We'll just try and get another one while there seem to be a few lined up down there. So you can see tail patterns and fizzing all the time as well. So exactly the same process as I've said each time. Just double checking your rig to make sure it's set at the right depth. As I say, if it's not, then that's when you'll just start foul hooking fish. One thing you might also be able to see is how much the wind's picked up now as well. Again, that's when paste fishing down the edge especially comes into its own. Being such a heavy bait, it anchors the rig absolutely still. So that, coupled with backshot, mean that you can get away with presenting a near completely static rig, which again just cuts down on foul hooking down the edge as well. Right, so as you can see now, we're getting towards the back end of the session. The wind's picked up as well, but coming towards the end of our 5 hours. So what we're going to try and do is just get one more fish to end on, really. So hopefully today's video has been of use to you in terms of like the tips and tricks that we've tried to get across with regards to paste fishing. Obviously it's not been the best demonstration of the method that we'd have hoped, really, in terms of just being sort of plagued by F1s in the peg which have just smashed the paste to pieces. The plan of attack today was really to try and catch a few decent carp and a few bream on it, but as I say, it doesn't always go to plan, especially on a venue like this with such a good mixture of fish, really. But we'll just get this popped into the peg and just see if we can get a fish to end on, while I'll do a quick recap. Again, just having to be really careful because of the wind, and as I say, that's going to very quickly put end to this session anyway. But hopefully, as I was saying, there's a few tips and tricks you can take away from today's episode on paste fishing. There's another fish on now. The main one's been regarding plumbing up in a flat area of the peg. Obviously, in open water, that's where you're going to find a lot of silt, so it's important to find the depth of that silt using a couple of different plummets, like a 30 gram and a 10 gram like we showed at the start. Really sort of trying to understand what the peg's like down there, and obviously bear in mind when you've plumbed up, marking the pole and marking on the line with a small shot just beneath the float to make sure you're always on the correct depth. And then just keeping in mind that as the session goes on, especially in very silty venues, that they can burrow into the silt, stuff like that. Just little tips to take away from the session. Like I say, in terms of what we've caught today, it's not been ideal. We were hoping for a few better carp, but there's been plenty of these in the peg, and a couple of barbel that we've caught as well. The other thing that's been apparent today as well for me has been learning to read the bites. Again, it's not a method that I fish a great deal, so it's something that you do have to practice. And if you are missing a lot of bites or foul hooking a few fish, you just need to think about that. Try and read the bites a bit better. And one thing that's worked today is just taking an extra bit of shot off the line and giving ourselves another sort of 10 mil on the float, and that's meant that we've hit a few more bites in open water from these finicky F1s. But like I say, we'll get him popped in the net and conclude the session at that. I don't think, with regards to taking the nets out and showing what we've caught, that's worth doing, because we've not had a massive weight today. We've had a decent mixture of a couple of proper carp, a few barbel, and mainly F1s and a couple of skimmers as well. So it's been a cracking little session. And as I say, hopefully there's a few pointers you can take away with regards to paste fishing. So as always from Last Cast, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on that next episode.